Sanjeevani Swagama Rambe Kamata Partudaha Damani Vishwapagolasini Duran Me Marushakinopi Sarasi Bhavaya Bhuyat Prabhu Shri Chaitanya Kripanarankuşamaha Madhurya Kadambini. Hariom Tat Sat. So we'll start our discussion of Ashtami, Amrita Vrishti, the 8th shower of nectar. The chapter title is Purna Manoratha. So the Manoratha means like the heart's desire, and Purna, the completion. So the complete fulfillment of the heart's desire, that is Prema Bhakti. That is the subject matter of the chapter. Anam Dam Buddhivardhanam Pratipadam Purnamrita Swadanam Purna Amrita Aswadanam. Purna Amrita, the complete nectar Aswadanam, one is tasting at every step, and Prema Bhakti. So the goal of life is Prema Bhakti according to Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Okay, so let's get into the subject matter here. I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. Okay. So, first thing, Sri Vishwanath informs us about the two unfolding leaves called sadhana on the desired creeper of bhakti were described before. Now, as hearing, chanting, and other devotional processes become very smooth, suddenly many shining petals known as anubhavas, symptoms of ecstasy, appear at every moment, clinging to the flower of bhav. So he's sticking to the image that we encounter in the very outset of the work. So the desire creeper has produced leaves, it's produced buds, it's produced flowers, and now many flowers are blossoming everywhere. And these are the flowers of the anubhavas. And after bhav bhakti, then there are the anubhavas. The conscious acts that express bhav are called as anubhavas. In the stage of sadhana, we're doing acts of bhakti to invoke bhava, invoke. And after bhava arises, the same acts of bhakti go on to express bhava. So bhav bhaktas and sadhana bhaktas, they both do kirtan, but there's a difference in the quality of their kirtan. For example, one kirtan is to get bhava, another kirtan is to express bhava. That's called as anubhavas, when you consciously express your devotion in many different ways. Okay, so these flowers of anubhavas are fully decorating this creeper, and now the flower will generate the fruit. So that fruit is Prema Bhakti. Sri Vishwanath says here, shining brilliantly, the fully blossoming flower of bhav matures and brings forth the fruit of prema. So here I put in parentheses the definition of Prema Bhakti. Samya mashranito swanto amatwati shanyankitaha bhava sar eva sandratma budhai prema nigatyate. So budhai prema nigatyate, the intelligent persons, sadhus, they refer to this as prema. What is that? Bhava sa eva sandratma. So the Swarup Lakshana of prema, it is that it is condensed or compact bhava. So we heard what is bhava, right? The Swarup Lakshana of bhav bhakti is Shuddha Sattva Vishesha Atma, right? It is the combination of the Lord Samvit Hladini Shakti. So when this becomes more condensed, that is called as prema. So prema is essentially bhava. That is more condensed. And then there are different levels of prema, of course, sneha, mana, pranaya, raga, anuraga, bhava, mahabhava, and then different types of mahabhava are there. So these are all just more condensed forms of the same substance. So this prema is Swarup Lakshana Bhava Sa Eva Sandratma. It is condensed bhava. And it's Tatasha Lakshana Samyamashrana Toswanto. We had heard in Bhav Bhakti that the heart melts with different types of desires. Ruchi Bish Chitta Masranya Krit. So that melting process begins in bhava, but in prema, samya masrana toswanto. The melting of the heart is comprehensive. That's the difference there. And mamatva atishayankitaha. One is imbued with intense mamatva. So mamatva means mindness. So now your mindness is fully rooted in the Supreme Lord and prema bhakti. He'll describe this just now, actually, at the end of his paragraph here, what the meaning is here. So we'll just read it. But when you come to the level of prema bhakti, then you're called as a siddha mahatma, a siddha bhakta, one who has attained siddhi or perfection, right? So I put the definition of a siddha bhakta here also in the second parenthetical note. It's in yellow. Avigyan takila klesha sadha krishnashrita kriya siddha syu santata prema sokyaswada parayana. So the first quality of the siddha bhakta, and this is what distinguishes him from the bhav bhakta, who was referred to as a sadhaka, right? We had discussed that the other day. The first quality specifically, avigyata akila klesha. So he does not know any klesha. In other words, he does not experience any klesha and prema. So in Bhav Bhakti, we had mentioned that the Bhav Bhakta has not extinguished all the anarthas, specifically the aparodhota anarthas, the anarthas that come from aparad. Their nullification is almost complete at the stage of bhava, but it is only complete at the stage of prema. So that is the distinction between bhava and prema. That is why Sri Rupa Goswami says that there are 3 degrees of bhakti, uttam bhakti, sadhana, bhava, and prema. Previously, this sort of distinction was not made. Normally, people just speak of bhakti in terms of sadhana and sadhya. But actually, he said this sadhya has 2 divisions, bhava and prema, and this is the main reason why. And siddha bhaktas, there is no awareness or there is no question of klesha, such as the klesha of like getting envious of Krishna, hating him, for example. That's an example of a klesha. There's no question of klesha in the siddha bhaktas. And sada krishnasrita kriya. And all activities, sadakriya, and all their activities, they are taking shelter of Krishna, krishnasrita. There's not a single activity they perform without taking shelter of Krishna. Okay, santata prema sokyaswada parayana. And they're constantly tasting the happiness of prema. Prema sokya aswada means tasting the happiness of prema. Santata, moment to moment. Purna amrita aswadanam. Pratipadam, purna amrita aswadanam, right? Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was also saying, pratipadam. So that every step, purna amrita aswadanam, they're tasting the complete nectar of prema bhakti. Santata prema sokya aswada parayana. So there's a definition of siddha bhakta. So there's no question of any fault in the siddha bhaktas, basically. Whether the siddha bhaktas are here in the material world or they're in the spiritual world, there's no question of defects like those encountered by the jivas, the sadhakas, and even the bhav bhaktas. They have some small defect there that they're still trying to get rid of. So this is the fruit of the desire creeper of bhakti yoga. This is the goal of the life of a genuine bhakta. Okay. So Sri Vishwanath goes on to say, but what is most astonishing about the creeper of bhakti is that though its leaves, buds, flowers, and fruits mature into the succeeding forms, still their original forms remain. Together they shine splendidly in newer and newer ways. So in Sankhya philosophy, we also follow this, the philosophy called Satkaryavad, which is speaking about the relationship between causes and effects. Basically, in Satkaryavad philosophy, the basic notion is that the effects exist in the cause in a subtle way. And the cause is therefore competent to give rise to a particular effect. It cannot give rise to an effect that doesn't exist in itself in a latent way. For example, peanut, a peanut can give rise to peanut oil, but it cannot produce sand because peanut oil exists in a peanut in a latent form. So it can give the effect of peanut oil, but it cannot give the effect of sand because that does not exist in the cause. So anyway, Satkaryavad deals with this relationship between causes and effects. Anyway, part of this philosophy, Satkaryavad, is that when the cause produces the effect, then the cause ceases to exist in its causal form. It ceases to exist. For example, if once the seed produces the creeper, then the seed ceases to exist. That's how things work or seem to unfold or actually unfold in nature. When the creeper is produced, the seed ceases to exist, right? So they said like that, when the cause gives rise to its effect, then the cause ceases to exist. So here, this is pointing out this is not true in bhakti. So you have, in terms of the sequence of the development of bhakti, the previous stage, seems to have a causal relationship to the subsequent stage, a cause and effect relationship. So the previous stage is like the cause, and the subsequent stage is the effect. So that means once it gives the effect, the previous stage, it ceases to exist. So here, Sri Vishwanath wants to say this is not true in case of bhakti. Although, there is a sequence and it's unfolding, all the sequences are eternally existing. So even when they give rise to the effects, the causes or the states that existed before those effects, they also exist in newer and newer ways. They are avyayam, imperishable. So like Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, susukam kartum avyayam. How does that verse start? Raja vidya raja guhyam pavitram idam uttamam pratyakshavagamam dharmyam susukam kartum avyayam. So this is Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. He's speaking about bhakti yoga. He's introducing the subject matter, saying that those who are devoid of the envy, they can hear it. I'm speaking this to you, Arjuna. Idam tu te guhyatamam prabhakshami anasuyave. Because you're not envious of me, I'm speaking to you this most secret knowledge. Then he said, Raja Vidya Rajagu is the king of knowledge. It is the king of secrets. It gives direct perception of reality. It is itself true dharma. It purifies to the superlative degree. It is happily performed, susukam kartum. And unlike Gyan and yoga, which is miserably performed. And the last line, avyayam, it is imperishable. So every part of bhakti yoga is imperishable. It is not that when it produces an effect, it ceases to exist. So the point here also that is being brought up by this statement of Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is that when bhakti produces the perfection is also bhakti. And so bhakti is both means and ends. So in other systems of yoga, Gyan yoga, Ashtanga yoga, even Karma yoga, once you move closer and closer to the perfection, the suddenness ceases to exist. Liberated souls do not do the various angas of their suddenness. And of course, once they merge into Brahman, if that be their goal, there is no question of them doing those sorts of practices anymore. But in the case of bhakti, whatever was your means, it is also your end. What was done in the beginning what was experienced in the beginning as medicine now becomes your food. So this bhakti yoga is imperishable. It is existing both in the stage of practice and also in the stage of perfection. That's what he wants to say, basically. And all the states of bhakti, they're all eternally manifest within a bhakta and experience in newer ways. So there's faith is there, there's bhava, there's asakti, there's ruchi. There's no question of anartha, or there's anartha nivritti, which means nullification of faults. There are bhajan kriya. All these states are always manifest in newer ways, even in the premi bhakta. So a basic point he's making here, a philosophical point. Okay, this last part of the paragraph, which is the third bullet point here in my little slide thing. Though previously the hundreds, if not thousands of emotions of the devotee were firmly bound by ropes of attachment to body, family, and money, prema now easily severs these bonds and through its own power takes the same emotions, though illusory, and dips them into a well of great rasa, whose mere touch completely transforms them into radiant transcendental feelings. Then it firmly ties these spiritualized emotions to the sweetness of the Lord's form, names, and attributes, such as prema, the brilliant rising sun, that immediately puts the host of star-like human aims to shame. Oh, I meant to pull up a particular verse. So here the point is being made that this prema bhakti is characterized by mamatva. So mamatva means mindness. We talked a little bit yesterday also about I am mine. How I am mine is strongly fixed in the body and the things that are related to the body. And this is what is called as hridaya granthi, the hard knot in the heart, which keeps us cycling in samsara repeatedly. They're very hard to break this knot, almost basically nearly impossible to break it. So here is saying, so much of our emotional landscape is tied to that which we think is mine. Even you may say a lot of how we identify is in terms of what we think is mine, right? We identify with the body, which is ours. That is the beginning of it. And then our identity gets attached to things like my country, my demographic, my gender, my sexuality, my religion, my this, my that. And according to the my, your identity becomes firmly established, right? A mother, before she has a child, is just a woman. Maybe she has a husband, so she's a wife. And then when she has a child, she becomes mother. So the identity of mother is based on the relationship of possessiveness with the child. The child is mine. Without the child, that identity wouldn't have any foundation to stand on. So in a lot of ways, mineness informs our identity. You can say, I am mine. I am mine. Whatever I think is mine, I identify with that. And then there's so many emotions that come with that mindness that keeps us tied to the world. Very profound. We know it very well by direct experience. So here he's saying those same emotions, which would keep us, that are tied to objects and will keep us in samsara, those same emotions become dipped in prema, basically. So that which is the cause of bondage becomes a way of expressing love to the Lord. They become dipped in prema, and then they become linked to the Supreme Lord, to Krishna. And so then the same emotions, which are, a problem, at least from the Vedanta perspective, a problem because it keeps us in illusion. Those same emotions in relationship to the Lord become sources of beauty and poetry and most astonishing mystic expression of love of God. So this is one of the main effects, you can say, because it's not the sort of lakshana, it's tatasha lakshana. So it's one of the main effects of prema, is this deep sense of mindness that is attached to the Lord. At the end of this chapter, we'll see Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur speaking about the stages from Sharada Prema in terms of the transformation of I and mine. So that will be a very interesting thing. We won't get to it today. We'll get to it maybe Monday. But yeah, we'll hear him speak about, you can think about spiritual life in terms of what happens to your I and mind. So that is a thing to be observed in a sense as you're making progress. If you're making, if one is making progress, then that's the thing that we're going to want to, that's the thing that we can observe within ourselves, the transformation of our I and mind. And of course, this mind, this is very much the characteristic of Prema Bhakti. Okay. So that's his opening statement here. So the next slide, where are we at here? Okay. So yeah, the unique pairs of characteristics of Prema. So we already heard that each stage of Bhakti is uniquely characterized by a pair of characteristics, right? So sadhana has 2 qualities. Bhav Bhakti has 4 qualities, but is uniquely characterized by 2. And Prema Bhakti has 6 qualities, but is uniquely characterized by a pair, right? So the pair of qualities that uniquely characterize sadhana Bhakti we heard is Kleshagni and Shubhada. So these 2 qualities are also included within Bhav, but Bhav is uniquely characterized by Sudhurlabha and Mokshala Guptakrit. And Prema Bhakti has 6 qualities, but is uniquely characterized by 2, Sandrananda Visheshatma and Sri Krishna Akarshani. So that's what he's saying in this second paragraph. The devotee relishes the rasa of the fruit of prema in the form of a particular compact bliss. The word he uses is Sandrananda Visheshatma, which means like compact bliss. You can think of it like metal. Metal is very dense. So nothing can just, go right through the metal. It's very dense. So the bliss of prema is so dense that nothing can penetrate it. What happens in the material world is that you experience some so-called bliss or happiness. But if some higher happiness comes, you can give up that other happiness, right? So sometimes people, like, for example, if you fall in love, then this is giving me so much happiness. But then you find a better option that's available to you, or in your mind, at least you think it is a better option. So then the prospect of this higher happiness comes. So you give up the other happiness. So like that, the jivas we keep running from object to object in the material world because we have perception of a superior happiness. But the happiness of prema is sandrananda. It is compact bliss, very thick bliss. So nothing can penetrate. In other words, there's no superior experience than the bliss that comes from prema. So this is the juice of the fruit of prema. Not every fruit, I guess, but not fruits in America at least, but real fruits, which can be found usually outside of America, they have juice in it. And the juice in this fruit of prema is called Sandrananda Visheshatma. Okay. The power that nourishes this rasa to the utmost is called Sri Krishna Akarshani, She, Bhakti, in the form of prema, who attracts Sri Krishna. Right. So every fruit, again, fruit that's probably not in America, it gives nourishment also to the body. So this fruit, the juice of it is this compact bliss, and it nourishes the soul with this quality known as Sri Krishna Akarshani. So Sri Krishna Akarshani means to attract, like a gravitational pull. So this Prema Bhakti has a gravitational pull on the heart of Krishna and Sri. So Sri means his bhaktas. You can say starting with Srimati Radhika, but it means Krishna and his bhaktas. So Srila Rupa Goswami, of course, quotes verses that shows how this Prema Bhakti attracts Krishna and also attracts Krishna's bhaktas. So this is the 2 unique characteristics of Prema Bhakti. The bliss of Brahman is compared to the water contained in the hoof print of a calf, or just a drop of the ocean of bliss that is Prema Bhakti. So that is the first quality. And Sri Rupa Goswami quotes a verse where Yudhishthira Maharaj, hearing about the glories of Prahlad Maharaj, was thinking, wow, I'm not so fortunate as Prahlad. So Narada Muni, who's preaching to Yudhishthira Maharaj throughout the 7th canto, he says, after telling the Prahlad Charita story, he says that actually you are so glorious that Krishna is living in your house. And because of that, everyone is coming to you. All these sadhus are constantly visiting your home. He gives like long lists of great sadhus and great devotees who come and visit because Krishna is residing there. And the devotees are residing there. So in this way, this Prema Bhakti attracts Krishna and his devotees. This is the unique characteristics of Prema Bhakti. Okay. When the devotee commences relishing this rasa, it is needless to say that he cannot encounter any obstacle anymore. In this condition, he forgets himself like a powerful warrior or a very greedy thief who loses all sense of discrimination. So one characteristic that's being brought out here is that Prema Bhakti produces a sort of self-forgetfulness. You can say a limited self-forgetfulness. All jivas are self-centered. It's impossible to escape that, actually. I often like to make this point. Many of you have already heard it. But I'll just say it in brief because it's just a good reminder that all jivas are self-centered. It's actually ontologically rooted in their nature because they are self. An apple can be appleish, or oranges, and so is selfish. It is very natural that the jiva is self-centered, and there is no fault in this also. The only fault is that our self-notion is limited, or you can say tied to a limited conception of self, right? There's this nice verse, Yasyatma bhudi kunapetri dhatuke, swadi kalatradi shubhoma egyadi, natirtu buddhi salile nakarichit, janeshu abigeshu sa eva gokara. So this is Krishna speaking to sadhus at Kurukshetra, I think at Kurukshetra. And he's telling in this verse that those who think the self to be the body, that is having the bile and mucus and marrow or whatever in it, this is called Atmadi. This is their self-notion of the self-notion. And Swadi, their notion of who is theirs or mine, is tied to their wife and children and so on. Kalatradi Shubham. Bhoma Igyadi, and their notion of what is worshipable is tied to the earthly deity. And that means Devata worship, basically. And Yatitra Buddhi, their notion of what is sacred is tied to a river. So those who have this self-notion, this notion of others, this notion of worshipable, and this notion of what is sacred, tied to these limited objects, but their self-notion doesn't extend to the abhigeshu, the sadhus. And this is Krishna glorifying the sadhus. So in other words, Krishna is not, it is natural that we identify with our body and, we value our family members and we worship some earthly deity and the river is sacred. This is all not, and this is not the real problem. But the problem is that the self-notion doesn't extend to the sadhus. That's what he's saying in this verse. So you don't identify yourself with the devotee. You don't identify the devotee as yours. You don't see the devotee as worshipable. You don't see him as sacred. Your self-notion doesn't extend that far. Then you are worse than an ass, basically. You're worse than an animal. Better you be an animal if you have that psyche. So anyway, point of this sharing this verse is that all selves are self-centered. The problem is that what is the notion of ourself? So with Premi Bhaktas, their self-notion extends all the way to Krishna. He's in a sense the greater self, right? After all, Mamaivam Shojiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. After all, we are just a part of this greater reality. So Krishna represents the greater self. So the Premi Bhaktas, they are absorbed in that greater self. And so they are forgetful of this limited self-notion. because they're absorbed in the greater self with love. They're absorbed in Krishna. So this seems to be a characteristic of those in prema. They become lost to the limited self notion. So we already heard previously and expressed in terms of what happens to their mamatva, their mindness, right? Suddenly they just give up family members and that mindness gets attached to the Lord. That means they've forgotten this limited self notion. Just like when Mahaprabhu, after he goes to Gaya and he meets his Guru Maharaj, Ishwar Puri, many beautiful prayers are there in Chaitanya Bhagavat at the end of the Adi Kanda. And then he comes back from Gaya to Navadvip and he's already like in Mahabhav, Prem Bhakti. And immediately, the first thing Sachimata noticed was how detached Mahaprabhu was, and it frightened her. In fact, everyone was frightened, seeing just this profound level of renunciation from Mahaprabhu. But the renunciation wasn't the bitter renunciation of the yogis and the gyanis, where they have to begrudgingly renounce sense objects and many times again get caught with their hand in the cookie jar. It wasn't that sort of renunciation. It was a renunciation that comes from self-forgetfulness and love of God. And, you know, Sachimata, she was trying to get Mahaprabhu married. So she invited Vishnu Priya because Lakshmi Priya had by this time departed while Mahaprabhu was on pilgrimage to Gaya. So Vishnu Priya, she was having to come in the house and display her, you know, womanly nature and her service attitude. And Mahaprabhu was completely oblivious to it. And Shachimata was freaked out to see that. So it's part of the nature of Prema Bhakti, it seems. I keep saying it seems because I'm not experiencing Prema. And the commentators said without really experiencing Prema, you can't really know what it is. But anyway, something has to be said about it. Some words are given by our acharyas. But actually, this is the fruit of mysticism. So mysticism means you have to see for yourself at the end of the day. Okay, so such eagerness produced from prema for the Lord is like hunger that cannot be satiated by 4 kinds of incomparably relishable rice. Even if one eats day and night, this eagerness burns in the devotees like the sun and cools them off like millions of moons when a vision appears of the Lord's endlessly sweet forms and attributes. So here and in the next 2 slides also, Sri Vishwanath's kind of describing, I'm going to use this word, a polarity engine. Think of a polarity engine like the bicycle, you know, you push one pedal down and the other pedal goes up and then you push that one down and that way it keeps cycling on and on and on. It's like an engine. So there's a polarity engine here that is experienced in the subjective life of a Premi Bhakta. On the one side of this engine is this insatiable eagerness. That's one pedal. This insatiable eagerness for seeing Krishna, for relishing his qualities, etc. And that produces basically the separation because their eagerness to have that. So it means you're separated from it. So it produces this burning sensation, which is experiencing, it is described as worse than the poison that was produced from the ocean of milk. So yeah, that's indescribable. The poison produced from the ocean of milk was drunk by Shiva. They call it Nilakanta for this reason, right? But while he was drinking it, only a couple of drops fell to the earth. And from those couple of drops, all the poisonous creatures in this world are generated or took that. And some of them are extremely poisonous just from a drop of that Kalakuta, the Kalakuta poison that was produced from the milk ocean. So that you can only imagine what the whole poison was like. If just a drop has created these potent poisonous entities on earth. And it says Prema Bhakti, the pain of separation is experienced like that poison. So inconceivable. And then the Lord, in reciprocation with that profound eagerness and feeling of separation, reveals himself. Then it's like that revelation defeats all the nectar that could be gathered in all the universes simultaneously. And so there's separation, that's one end of the polarity, and then there's this meeting, Krishna, that's the other end. And these two keep cycling around. So we Anandam Buddhivardhanam, right? Anandam Buddhivardhanam means the bliss keeps expanding. And that's because of this, you can say, polarity engine. So this is being described here. The analogy being given here is like hunger. So this is expressing the eagerness part or the separation part. It is like a hunger that cannot be satiated by eating food. So usually hunger and food are enemies of each other, right? If you eat food, then your hunger is destroyed. But here is saying that even by eating the food, the hunger is not destroyed from meeting Krishna. I was reminded of a nice verse. This verse is coming in the beginning of the 12th chapter of the first canto. There, they want to describe Yudhishthira Maharaj is taking Parikshit Maharaj to the astrologers to see what type of leader he will be. And there one verse, the opening passages of that chapter describing Yudhishthira Maharaj actually and his glory. And there's one verse there is very nice. Kente kama sura sparhar mukunda manasodija. Adi javru mudhan rajna shudi tashiyatetere. Love this verse. Even Prabhupada has a really cool purport. So it says that Yudhishthira Maharaj, his wealth was such that it was desired by all the denizens of heaven. They all wanted what he had. But because he was Mukunda Manaso, so Mukunda Manaso means his mind was Mukunda, basically, Prema Bhakti. Adi Jahru Mudhan Rajna, he got no pleasure from any of that wealth. And then an example is given, Shudi Tasha Yateture. It is just like a hungry person who cannot be satisfied by anything except for his hunger being met, right? So this is nature. Like if you're hungry, even if you're in a very rich person and you're living in a very opulent place, but you are hungry, what will that wealth do for you? We grew up with this story. What was it called? King Midas, maybe? I don't remember. About a king. He asked for the benediction that whatever he touched would turn into gold. So in the beginning, he was enjoying that benediction until he realized when he touched the food would also turn into gold. So then he realized, I'm finished. I'm finished. How will I eat? So when you have hunger in the stomach, what uses all this gold also? So Prabhupada, in his purport, I just read a little portion of it just because it's just nice, just on that point. He writes here, the whole material world is full of hungry living beings. Right. The hunger is not for food, good food, shelter, or sense gratification. Oh, the hunger is for the spiritual atmosphere. Due to ignorance only, they think that the world is dissatisfied because there is not sufficient food, shelter, defense, and objects of sense gratification. This is called delusion. When the living being is hungry for spiritual satisfaction, he is misrepresented by material hunger. Wow. But the foolish leaders cannot see that even the people who are most sumptuously materially satisfied are still hungry. And what is their hunger and poverty? This hunger is actually for spiritual food, spiritual shelter, spiritual defense, and spiritual sense gratification. These can be obtained in the association of the Supreme Spirit, Lord Shri Krishna. And therefore, one who has them cannot be attracted by the so-called food, shelter, defense, and sense gratification of the material world, even if they are relished by the denizens of the heavenly planets. What an amazing little part of the purport. And that's exactly what's being described here. The hunger of prema is so intense that nothing in the material world can satisfy this devotee, not even his spiritual practices minus darshan of Krishna. So let's get into a little bit of this. Sri Vishwanath expands on this polarity engine in the next two paragraphs. So this is the first one describing the separation or eagerness part of the polarity engine of prema. He says here, this wonderful prema, I'm just going to read this part because it's completely inconceivable. This wonderful prema simultaneously grants powerful anxiety and relief from it. That's the engine part. Okay. When this prema arises in its reservoir, the devotee, and slightly increases. The devotee is constantly scorched by the fire caused by the arrow of his great eagerness to encounter the Lord. His eagerness is so powerful that he cannot be satisfied even by having visions of the Lord's sweet form and pastimes. Yes. So the sporti, which is the word used by Sri Vishwanath, the sporti, which was very satisfying and blissful in bhav bhakti, becomes impotent in prema. Sporty will not do. I actually need to see Krishna himself. As is described, that when Krishna left Braj, so the cowherd boys, they would have sporties of Krishna. Not only cowherd boys, everyone, but the residents of Braja, they would feel pacified by these sporties of Krishna. But the gopis will feel very much increased agitation from seeing the sporty of the Lord. So prema is something like this, that even the sporty not good enough. Okay, so at that point, his relatives are like a blind, waterless well to him. His home is like a thorny forest. Any food he may take feels like a great beating. Praise offered by the saints feel like snake bites. His daily duties feel like death. His each and every limb feel like a big burden. Consolations by his friends feel like a poisonous glance. His constant wakefulness feels like an ocean of repentance. And if sleep accidentally comes to him, this again is like a torment tearing up his life. Maintenance of his body is like the embodiment of the Lord's punishment. And his life airs are like grains roasted over and over again. What's more, that which was always considered desirable in the past is now looking like a great disaster. Even meditating on the Lord appears to be like self-deception. Nice shlokas are there. I actually kind of wanted to read the commentary to one of them, but maybe our time is up now. When Uddhava comes to Braj, so he comes with a letter from Krishna. And in the letter, Krishna opens up by saying, why are you feeling separation from me? I am all pervading. You simply meditate on me. So the gopis are incredulous. What is this? Not meditate on you. What will this meditation do in the ocean of our prema? So Sri Vishwanath offers really beautiful commentary there about actually, maybe I should read it. It's really sweet. The commentary is explaining how when Krishna called the gopis from Maharasa, if you read it in chapter 29, so there he gives instructions about karma, how you should do the duties of a wife and be proper. Your husbands are waiting for you back home, etc. But actually his talk had an external meaning and an internal meaning. So the external meaning, he was teaching about karma, but the internal meaning, he was teaching about the nature of conjugal rasa. So in that way, the words can be taken two ways. So also when Krishna wrote this letter to the gopis, so externally, he's teaching about Gyan. You do this Gyan, you meditate, I'm all pervading, I'm the absolute truth. You meditate on me. This Gyan thing he's teaching. But that Gyan, how can that Gyan stand in the fire of their prema? That Gyan is like a log in the fire of their prema. It's just completely consumed and destroyed. There's no question of it remaining. So there's an inner meaning of Krishna's letter where he's also teaching about prema bhakti. So Sri Vishwanath kind of breaks that down a little bit. It's actually quite beautiful. I was reading it this morning and finding a little inspiration there. But I'm just going to say the other side of the polarity engine, and then we'll end the class. And if y'all want to see that purport commentary, it's very, very nice. So that's the heavy side, the poison side. Here's the positive. It's all positive. It's all bliss, but of inconceivable nature. This is the Sambhoga side. Krishna is relieving them. After that, this prema assumes the nature of a magnet that attracts the black iron like Shri Krishna, making him appear before the devotee at some time. The Lord then also shows his own most auspicious innate attributes like beauty, nice fragrance, nice voice, his tenderness, nice taste, generosity, and compassion to the senses like the eyes of his devotee. Make note of this when we get to it on Monday. You just note this particular point, how Krishna is giving his darshan. So Sri Vishwanath's going to make a point. This darshan is coming sequentially. First his beauty, then the fragrance, then the voice, then his tenderness, his taste, his generosity, and compassion of the senses. Nice section from the CC. We'll read it from it, how Krishna is giving his darshan to the Premika devotee, not just a spurti in the mind, but face to face, shoulder to shoulder, chest to chest, lips to lips, if you're in the amorous rasa, and so on. Really far out explanation. All these attributes are most sweet and eternally fresh. And when the devotee starts to relish them with love, it increases within his heart at every moment. So that's the polarity engine, right? He's meeting Krishna and tasting that, but then that's increasing his eagerness. And that way there's this dynamic at play. This causes a powerful eagerness and finally creates an ocean of ecstasy that no poet could properly describe, right? The bliss that a devotee enjoys at that time can only be slightly compared to the bliss a traveler on a sun-stricken desert road feels when he comes to the cooling shade of the dense foliage provided by a thick banyan tree and takes shelter of a shore washed by hundreds of jugs of cold celestial Ganges water, or a forest elephant who is constantly tormented by a forest fire feels when he is showered by an unending stream of water, or a person who is afflicted by hundreds of ailments and who is very greedy for taste feels when he suddenly gets sweet nectar to drink. So these are not really good comparisons, but this is the best Sri Vishwanath says we could offer. You have to experience for yourself. Just a little final note here about all this. We're hearing about prema, and I was just thinking how so many of these subject matters do not appear attractive, even to devotees. We tend to just like write it off as this is beyond me. This is not at my stage of development, which is all true also. There's no lie there. But then we want to hear something more philosophical. We want to hear an acronym. Fear means, F means this, E means that, A means this, and so on. And everyone gets really, juiced up hearing these sorts of explanations, and they are very eager to share that. But then when you just hear about love itself, there's no attraction. So this is our disease. Our disease is that we're not attracted to love. Tadashma saram hridayapatedam, or we're scared of it. As Sri Narada Muni says to Gopakumar also, he says, actually, I should not talk about this prema because when many people hear about this prema, they become afraid. You hear there's like poison of Kalakuta, poison coming from milk ocean, people become scared. I was in Kali, this must have been like 3 years ago now, 4 years ago. And she's an older lady, but newer devotee. I think her name was Gloria. And I remember her saying in one of our classes, we were talking about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Prema Bhakti. And she said, whenever I hear you talk about Prema, I become scared. She said, it just sounds like too intense. And I laughed and said, yeah, Narada Muni also says this thing to Gopakumar that I should not say because you become afraid. But because he is having prema, he could not but speak of it. So he anyway speaks to Gopakumar. So we were talking in this verse yesterday, also Vidaraga Bhaya Krodha, and Prabhupada saying we have to give up fear. We have to give up the fear of prema, the fear of the goal of life. Stop writing it off. Oh, that's beyond me. That's beyond myself. Okay, that doesn't mean you shouldn't hear about it. The only way you'll become acquainted with it, unless you're experiencing it directly, is to hear about it. So that is Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially Anshalila. The whole reason Kaviraj Goswami has written that book is for the Anshalila only. He glosses the earlier pastimes of Mahaprabhu and the Adi Lila. He says, for that, you go to Chaitanya Bhagavat. Then in Madhya Lila, he does a little expansion because Mahaprabhu, Madhya Lila is the first 6 years of his sannyas, where he's preaching, traveling and preaching. And so many instructions are coming in that section. Sanatan Shiksha, Rupa Shiksha, conversation with Ramananda Roy, Ramananda Sambad is there. So many nice and important instructions coming in that section. But then the Anshalila is the whole reason why he wrote the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and that is all about love. So totally inconceivable. And hard to get into because it's not a philosophical point that applies to our life. But we should give ourselves a chance to be attracted to love. That's what I want to say here. As I mentioned yesterday, also, Ayandra was saying this thing that the only anartha he saw in the Krishna consciousness movement, aside from the bodily concept of life, which is obviously very powerful, is that we're afraid to be attracted to Krishna. So I was thinking about that just reading this. Like a lot of times when we read this section, we just want to gloss over it or we become inattentive immediately. Oh, this doesn't apply to me, and become immediately inattentive. We don't show even proper respect for the topic by at least, okay, it is being spoken now. That means it is time for me to hear this thing. Somehow by providential arrangement, Christian wants me to hear about this thing at this particular moment. No, we just write it off in our hearts. So this is our biggest defect as bhaktas, is that we're not attracted to prema. And if you're not attracted to prema, then how can you gain your real prospect? Or you could say your real gift as a sadhaka. The real gift is a desire for prema. The desire for prema of a certain type, of course, as we've been saying. And that you cherish that in your heart, and that desire is what's going to transform your entire life. So that only comes by hearing Gaur Lila, Ancha Lila, and then of course so many plays, books about Krishna and Lila also. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that we shouldn't be afraid of prema or just write it off because we're not qualified. Yeah, we are not qualified, but somehow we are we have to hear this right now. That is what is coming up in terms of providence. Okay. So that's the beginning introduction of this Prem Bhakti subject matter. Very nice. Next, we'll hear about the darshan of the Lord and then his topmost quality of mercy. A very nice section. And then Sri Vishwanath will summarize his book. And we still actually have the first shower to go, which is a little bit technical. So we'll cover the rest of the 8th shower on Monday, hopefully. And then after that, we'll take the test. And then I'll go back to the first shower. The first shower is very technical, so not likely to stick as easily as some of the ideas from the different stages. Okay, so we'll take some questions or comments if someone wants to ask. So Sri Govinda says, what were the 3 levels, sadhaka, bhava, then prema? Yes, those are the 3 levels. Prema having 2 levels, no. Sadhya bhakti. So sadhana means the means to the sadhya, and the sadhya means the goal of the sadhana, right? So the sadhya has 2 parts, bhava and prema. That's what we were saying. So I do have a course, A Love Supreme. I think most of you have taken that course. I still think I have it somewhere available. So we cover all those points there. The A Love Supreme course is just the first Eastern Ocean of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. I was actually very proud with how I did that course. Okay, Athena coming back after a while. Sorry, can you translate into English what the 2 defining qualities are for sadhana bhakti, bhav, and prema? So all these things should be known already. You also took my Love Supreme course. Everything is there in that course, all these things. That's why I said for some of you, this is supposed to be review of some of the BRS stuff. And maybe I can only think of one person on here right now, Reed, who would be unfamiliar with some of these things. Everyone else should be knowing. Siddha Hari, you took Bhakti Shastri. Agape, of course, Agape, he's a little bit of a geek, and he just took BRS with me, so it's fresh in his head. Everyone else here took the same courses with me. You all should be knowing these things by now. This BRS is one of our most important books. Out of all the books of the Goswamis, the BRS is like one of the most important ones. Mahaprabhu speaks to Rupa Goswami at Dashramedha Ghat 10 days, and then this book is the result of that, BRS, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So these are very basic things we should be knowing by now. This should all be review. No shaming here, just anyway, it's all right. I know Siddha Hari Prabhu took the course, Bhakti Shastri course, in like 2 days. You take the course to pass the course. But I was walking with them at our retreat, and I was like, do you understand all the things that you learned from the course? He said, was that the purpose of the course? Understanding the purpose. Oh, I kind of missed that. Thought the purpose was to pass the test. Oh my God, dude. So try to remember some of these things are very basic, not so difficult. Anyway, the word Kleshakni means the destroyer of misery, ignorance, material desire, and sin. Those are the three miseries. The second quality is Shubhada, that it gives auspiciousness, which basically means qualities. Then the third quality, Sudurlabha, means it is rarely obtained. And we discussed it's rarely obtained for two reasons. And then the fourth quality is that it finds liberation contemptible. And then the fifth and sixth quality we discussed today, Sandrananda Visheshatma, means it is compact bliss. And the last one, Sri Krishna Akarshani. It attracts Krishna and Sri. Sri means his devotees. Okay. That's why I'm doing a test on this afterwards, little test on this afterwards. So, because I know that integration doesn't happen until you have to think for yourself, basically. So that's why I'll be asking the questions. I'll send the questions beforehand, and then you answer them, and then we'll discuss them in one group together. Otherwise, the things do not become integrated. Okay, Sri Govinda says, forget my question, for I got my answer, and correct the Sadhaka the son. Okay, got it. Those are all those concepts. It was too early to be able to observe. Okie dokie. Okay, Athena has a question and Gal has a question, then we can end there.
Haribo. I guess I'm trying to just process how, and I've heard you say it many times, how the self ontologically is selfish because it's the self. And you gave a really nice explanation of the extension of the ego when a woman becomes a mother once she has a child. Now with prema, it's the extension to the quote unquote higher self. But if I were to just take a step back and kind of view it, it's almost like that they lose identity with anything other than the higher self. Not that they become the higher self, but how does it that they become so absorbed that then they forget any other identity that they have? Because it's not, because what we're saying is that, I mean, we're an extension of Krishna, like we're his Shakti. So we now become fully absorbed in this quote unquote higher self. But it's not that you lose the identity of, I hope I'm just explaining it properly. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how is this? It seems like you would. It's not, a gopi doesn't forget that she's a gopi, and she doesn't forget perhaps the other relationships. But it's almost like she does, or you would think, assume that you lose any other
so
attachment.
Mahaprabhu had 3 states of awareness, right? External, partial, external, internal, and fully internal. These are his 3 states of awareness, right? So in external awareness, he would be, having conversations with the public and doing kirtan and all of that. Then he would sometimes go in and out, and then he would have fully internal consciousness where he was completely unaware of the external world and just lost in ecstasy. So like this, you reconcile. When the devotees go into this deep internal awareness, they attain a state known as tadatmya. So if you study also chapter 30, 10th canto, the tadatmya refers to when 2 objects become like one. The example of a tadatmya sambandha, tadatmya relationship, is the iron rod and fire. So they become like one, so much so that the iron rod can burn objects like fire, but the iron rod is still an iron rod and fire is still fire. So they obtained tadatmya sambandha, so much they were absorbed in Krishna that the gopis thought they were Krishna, and they would perform his pastimes as if they were Krishna. They were lost in such internal awareness. Or Mahaprabhu gets lost in internal awareness, not aware of the outside world. But then sometimes the prema calms down a little bit, become a little bit normal. And then you, okay, walking around, having some But then even the part we will read tomorrow, so we'll describe this. Those sort of activities are kind of taking place sort of like automatically. I think the example that Kaviraj Goswami gives is just like a potter's wheel that just it's just rolling by itself sometimes, but no one's consciously moving it. So in the same way, not same way, but in some way like this, they're trying to help us get a sense of what it might be like. Activities are going on without the conscious awareness. But when they're lost in this internal awareness, then there's a complete self-forgetfulness. So in this way, you can reconcile. There are different degrees of intensity. So when it's less intense, there's room for conversation. When it's more intense, there's no room for conversation. I have to go into Gambhira, lock the doors, and cry and be lost.
Thank you. And on the flip side, if I ask, if the self is ontologically selfish, then when one merges into the Brahma Jyoti, while it's slightly different from, say, the Buddhist mentality that you lose the self, like their whole concept is to become selfless, like zero. Here you become like one and you lose all identity. And you don't even have any awareness of the self, or it's almost like you're kind of like nothing. But then how isn't that contradictory to the actual being ontologically selfish, and they no longer have any of those qualities? They're almost like there's no awareness of the self.
Yeah, they've done all of that for the self only though, right? They're merging into Brahman. That was done for their self, right? Their notion of self. They have notion of self as spirit, soul. And then they attain identity with Brahman because they can't become Brahman. Eternal objects can't become other things. So they don't become Brahman. They attain identity with Brahman forever. So they've done all that for the self, right? So they're selfish. They were thinking of
aren't
themselves.
we Brahman, but Krishna is Par-Brahman? So we are Brahman, we are spirit. So
this depends on how you're using the word, but we're not the Brahman effulgence. So we are Brahman, means we are jivas. So that's why they give the other terms to us also, because there's distinction between all these categories of being. So we are jivas. We also Brahman. Nature is also called Brahman by Krishna and Bhagavad Gita. Maya is also referred to as Brahman. So you have to see how this word Brahman being used. We're all categories of being. So the Brahman, we're talking about the Sayuja Mukti, Brahma Jyoti. So the jivas are not that Brahma Jyoti. And they can obtain identity with it through their some sadhana combined with bhakti. So they've done all of that for the self, right? So they're selfish also. They've done it for the spirit self. That's all. Not for the false ego self, but for the spirit self, they've done it. So they are also.
Sorry. Sorry, just to clarify, but isn't the Brahman effulgence, the Brahma Jyoti, actually it's illuminated by the jivas? Actually, that's what I thought it was. It's this beautiful, how it shines.
Sometimes that's described like that, but actually it is Krishna's effulgence.
So we don't illuminate, if one went to merge, they're not illuminating.
If there were no jivas in Brahman, it would still be bright.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Interesting clarification. But I guess on the note, what I meant was, even though they are you're right, they're selfish in that everything they did was for the self. But how could you lose all the qualities of the self once you reach that?
You don't lose them. They're just not active. Just like you have ability to write, but if you're not writing, that doesn't mean you lost your ability. It is just not manifest. So the qualities that are intrinsic to the self are still there, but they're not manifest in that state of Sayuja Mukti forever. That's all.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Okay, Gail, that can be the last question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I was trying to relate myself to this fear of prema, because when I think of prema, or this like like super intense love that, is like metal, you can't see. So, why, I still don't get why we would be afraid of that. And that's aside from, feeling like, well, this is so high that I can't relate to it. I don't, aside from that, what is this? I don't get the fear.
Well, maybe because you're a devotee of the Lord, but for others, it's problematic.
No, but I mean to say, I am an ordinary, conditioned soul. So I'm just trying to really get a better understanding of why is this.
I don't know how it works for all creatures, but you can intuit. Sometimes you've heard this in mundane relationships. I'm afraid of losing myself. I'm afraid of losing myself to this relationship. I don't even recognize the person I was anymore. You hear like this in a mundane romantic relationship, right? I've seen some comments here that are very important here. I want to come to that too. So like that, there could be fear of losing, even like the concept of surrender to Krishna. You like give everything to Krishna, everything, your body, your mind, your words, your soul, all your wealth. No.
No, but I mean, if you are doing that out of like out of being helplessly attracted to something.
Yeah, that's we're not talking about people who are helplessly attracted. We're talking about people who are afraid to enter into that vulnerable situation, right? That means before being helplessly attracted. Once you're helplessly attracted, you're done. You're done for. You're finished. But this is before you're helplessly attracted. So it could be a little bit of a challenge, right? The idea of surrendering everything, losing myself,
Yeah, so therefore, I mean, it seems like the fear then is just because you've jumped the gun, kind of.
Maybe, yeah, maybe that's part of it, jumping the gun. There could be, I mean, we're all individuals. We have all these different scars playing out in our heads. So why we would be afraid will come from different sources. Ultimately, the courage to go beyond that fear is coming from impressions that we receive from devotees. They're giving us confidence in the happiness for the fish is in the water. So we're getting those impressions from devotees. So we gain the courage to cross over the ocean of fear, which can come from any number of sources that we would be unaware of. They're coming from the unconscious, sabotaging our progress towards bhakti in various ways. So why someone is afraid won't be the reason why another person is afraid, but fear is a governing factor.
Thank you. And just one simple question is, would you say that Bhakti Devi is synonymous with Radharani?
Yes, I honestly don't know how this word Bhakti Devi is used. Like, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the word Shakti, which we normally translate as energy, is not really a proper translation. Like Shakti, behind all Shaktis, there's like a goddess. And so, yeah, Gaudiya Vaishnavism kind of reifies all these abstract terms that you find in the secular world, like energy. It's like a very abstract term. And Hinduism in general, but also in Gaudiya Vaishnavism specifically, all these terms that are translated kind of that have like a secularized translation have like goddesses and like form behind it. So Bhakti Devi is referring to the Shakti as these different goddesses or just as a goddess categorically speaking. I don't always know exactly how the word Bhakti Devi is being used, but Radharani is supporting Shakti, so it could certainly refer to her also.
Okay, thank you.
So there's some side comments here that are important. It seems that those who merge in Brahmajyoti are condemned forever. That's certainly how Gaudiyas view it, and that's how Bhaktas view it. And Mukunda says they are true to the Gaudiya spirit. And Bhaktari says sounds like hell, also true to the Gaudiya spirit. So you'll find many shlokas, even in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, corresponding to chapter 4 of the Nectar Devotion. You'll find many verses that compare the Brahmajyoti liberation to hell. Actually, they compare it to worse than hell. because at least in hell, there's still a sense of individuation. And you suffer in hell for a while, and then you come back and to the earth, Bhumandal, and then you get a chance to associate with bhaktas and get a chance for bhakti. But once you merge into Brahman, that's it, done deal. And so for bhaktas, that's worse than hell, because then the prospect for bhakti is you're permanently cut off from the prospect of bhakti. Of course, this is a subject of controversy, it seems, like the fall of the jiva and all that. So not getting into that, general understanding is like this, that, yeah, you're cut off from the prospect of bhakti forever if you merge. And so it's worse than hell. That's how Gaudiyas view it. But is there some bliss in Brahman? If some bliss is there, that's why they call it as Brahmana Ananda, right? Brahmananda, Brahmananda, right? Jivananda is there, Brahmananda, and Sarup Shakti Ananda. These are three categories of Ananda available. Jiva Ananda means the bliss coming from your own self, very minuscule, which is basically dukkha pratiyogi. It is the absence of dukkha, basically. Or the opposite of dukkha, dukkha pratiyogi. That's how Jiva Goswami describes it in Paramatma Sandarbha. Then the Brahmananda is something. What is it? The words and the mind return without being able to express it. If you go on, say, Taittiriya Upanishad, there's this chapter called the Ananda Bali, the Creeper of Bliss chapter. I think it's like chapter 3. And in that chapter, they're giving gradations of happiness. You know, the topmost gradation of happiness in the world of karma, and it goes up, 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 all the way up to Brahmajyoti, who has the greatest degree of happiness available in the material sphere. And then it goes up to Brahman, and then it says that the words and the mind return without being able to access it, which in other words, they're not able to describe what that bliss is like. But it's vastly superior to the highest happiness in this material world, which is experienced by Brahman, by Lord Brahma. So it's something. What it is, the mind and words return without being able to describe it, but it's something that's superior to the topmost happiness available in the material world. So yeah, it's something there. And that's why people don't fall from Brahman also. So it's definitely something, but it's contemptible for Vaishnavas. It's in Gaudiyas, no, absolutely not. That so-called Brahmananda is worse than hell. I would take hell over that Brahmananda. That's how Gaudiya Vaishnavas think. But if we're being impartial, it's something. I like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's analogy. It's going from negative integers to zero. So negative integers, when you look at zero from negative integers, a zero is a positive number in relationship to negative integers. But Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we're just asking the question, are there positive integers also? Can I get one of those? Can I experience one of those? So Bhakti wants to take it a step further. So we're speaking impartially, a zero is still positive compared to the negative experiences of the material world. But Bhakti is a positive integers by which the zero cannot compare to. So impartially speaking, it's all right, but Gaudiyas find it very contemptible. Athena, how do you reconcile that in CC it states that one will fall from Brahmajyoti? We've already discussed that 100 times, so not gonna go there. That is where a lot of devotees point for shastric support. I don't know what they're pointing to. The one shloka that they often point to is a verse that's describing the Jiva Muktas who are in the material world. They're not in the Brahmajyoti. So they're going to have to find a better pramana than that. Or that statement that says Brahmajyoti is not permanent. That statement, you have to find it and share that statement. Brahman is permanent if you attain Sayuja Mukti. So that's why it's worse than hell. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worse than hell also. It'd just be like Swarga Loka or hell. You go there, you enjoy or suffer for some time, and then you come back. So why would it be more contemptible for Gaudiyas than Swarga Loka or hell? It would be the same as Swarga and hell, actually, because you go there, come back. So the reason the Gaudiyas find it more contemptible is because that state is a permanent state. Okay, so we're gonna pause there. Thank y'all very much. We'll continue on Monday, and yeah, nice subject matter. Prema Bhakti. Madhurya Kadambini ki jai, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bo. Read.